Right, so let's go and look at creating a attribute. What we're going to look at in this section is we're going to look at the basics of creating an attribute. So I'll go through and I will set up the kind of minimum that you need to know when you're creating your attribute. And we'll then start looking at some of the more advanced options. This part is going to come in two parts. There's this part where we're going to look at the basics of the attribute, and then the follow-up video we're going to have a look at some of the more sophisticated attribute options that we could be using. Right, let's first start off by looking at attributes then. So if I go to the catalog menu and down to where it says attributes, you'll see that there's a menu item called manage attributes and manage attribute sets. Okay, we're interested in this one here, which is manage attributes. So let's click on that. Okay, what you'll see here in alphabetical order is all of the attributes that exist within the store. So it's not specifically saying what these attributes are used for or what attribute sets these attributes are in. It's just listing them all off. And you can see here that I'm currently looking at 20 records. There's 51 in total. So if I just expand this out to, let's say, show 100 attributes, you can see here as I scroll down all the attributes. So what are these all about? Well, if you have a look down and look at some of them, you'll recognize what some of them are. So if I go down to, say, name, that attribute there is the name of a product. So the question is, what's the name of the product? And this is the attribute that defines that. We've also got SKU. Okay, so all products have to have a SKU. And you'll also see things like the description here, and short description, so on and so forth, the price of the product. These are all defined as attributes. So what we want to do is we want to create our own attribute that defines a specific question that we want to ask about a product. So again, at this stage, all we're doing is creating the attribute. We're not saying what products it relates to. That will come to that later when we look at attribute sets. Okay, so if you look over in the top right hand corner, you'll see this option, which is add new attribute. So I select that. Right, so what we're presented here is the new product attribute page. So this is going to allow us to create the attribute. And we're going to work through these questions. Mainly this part for this section. I will focus on some of the options in here, but we'll come back to the more advanced options in later videos. Okay, so the first question it asks is what the attribute code is. And you'll see that there's a note underneath it. It says for internal use, must be unique with no spaces. The maximum length of an attribute code must be less than 30 symbols. One thing it doesn't say here is it can't start with a capital either. What that's telling me is, asking me is, what is the unique code for this attribute? And a unique code is kind of like a system code. If you have developers who are working on this, they may reference this in code or in pages where they want to display certain attributes on certain part of the pages. They may reference this code. On the whole, once you put this in, you probably won't reference it too much again. However, what we need to do is put a code in here. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an attribute for a luggage item, and I'm going to create an attribute which is to define whether an item has wheels or not, whether that luggage item has wheels or not. Okay, so I'm going to select my attribute code and I'll just call it wheels. All right, so all in lowercase, no spaces or any characters in there. Right, the next element here is the scope. Now, we do a course on multi-store and multi-currency websites where scope is kind of like explained in its fullest. But essentially what scope means is at what level can this be overridden? If you look in the drop down, you'll see there's three options. There's store view, website, and global. Okay, so when in this example we're saying that when we create a product we say whether the product has wheels or not. So we'll create the product and the question will come up, has it got wheels? And the answer will be yes or no. Now if we have that set as global, no matter which store view someone is looking on, it'll always say yes. It will always say what that answer is. Okay. If we have it as store view or website, what we can potentially do is if we've got multiple websites, is we can say on one website we want it to display yes, it has got wheels, and on another website we want it to say no, it hasn't got wheels. Okay, so we can override that default on separate websites. If you're running a one store Magento installation, then really you don't need to worry too much about what your setting is here. Probably the safe one to do with a lot of these ones is just to go for global, but it is just an important distinction to know if you do start running multiple websites. Okay, the next question down is, what is the input type for the store owner? Okay, so let's go through the main ones of these. Okay, we have a text field, so that's like a sentence. So we've got here, the attribute code that could be seen as a text field. Then we've got a text area, so that could be a description field where maybe you've got paragraphs of detail that you want to put in there, or bullet points or something like that. You would probably do that in a text area. Date is if it's a date field, so obviously we can put a valid date in there. We've got a yes no field, okay, which is what we're going to use for this one. And yes no basically means that you can only answer the question with a yes or a no. So in this case, we're going to have a wheels question. Has it got wheels? There's only two possible answers, one's yes, one's no. Then we have multiple select and drop down. These allow you to put in a list of possible values, okay, and the person who's entering the data can then select from the values. So if it's a drop down, they can only select one of the values. If it's a multi-select, then they can select multiple of the values in that list. Right, price is an alternative price. Okay, there is already a price field in there, but you may want different price fields in there. We've also got media image, which allows us to upload alternative images. So you will see when we come to look at the product creation side and the image part of it, that there are free images already in there. This allows you to create additional ones, so you may have an additional requirement. And then we've got an additional tax field, so you might want a fixed tax against a product, for example, and so you want that to be created as an attribute. Quite advanced feature, but it's there. But the ones you're probably mainly dealing with are these ones here, which is the text field, text area, date, yes, no, multi-select, and the drop down. Right, so in this case, we wanted the yes, no. Right, when I select that, it now in context, it's asking me questions about the yes, no field. First one is, what do I want the default value to be? So when someone's creating a product for the first time, what is the value that is already selected for this particular product? And so we can choose yes or no. Unique value is one that, use with caution, I would say, and you certainly wouldn't use it on something like a yes no field. Okay, so what unique value means is that only one product can have the value that you set. All right, so think of something like a SKU, the product ID. You only want one product ID in the system, so you don't want to accidentally have multiple product IDs. So in which case, unique value, setting that to yes would be valid. If you set it to yes on this one, we'd only be able to have two products in the system with this question. One which said yes, it has got wheels, and one that said no. Once we've filled those two slots, if you like, no other products can have that value. So it's completely redundant in this situation, but that's what it's there for. Values required. If that's set to yes, then the product cannot be saved until a value is assigned to this particular attribute. All right, so it's set to no, which means that when you're creating a product, you can choose whether to answer this question or not. And if you choose not to and save it, it'll still save the product. However, if this was set to yes and you tried to save the product, it would come up with a notification, and it wouldn't save it until you actually assigned a value to it. Right, so finally, we have this option here. Oh, incidentally, the input validation for store owner, I'll come back to that when we in the next video, where we look at the different types of attributes that we can create. Okay, so the apply to, we've got all product types here. Okay, if I select selected product types, these are the different product types that are available to us. All right, and we'll go through and explain each of these product types when we're looking at that part of this course. But what it's basically saying is that certain attributes might only be valid for certain product types. So in this case, this might only be valid for a simple product, but it's not so valid for group products, right? So in which case, when I'm creating a group product, I don't necessarily want this question presented to me. If I leave it as all product types, then no matter what product I'm creating, as long as this attribute is in the attribute set that product is in, then it'll ask me that question. Right. I can then go over to this tab here. So we've got the properties tab. We've also got this manage label options tab. If I go to that, you'll see that there is a field here which is what the title is for this particular attribute. Okay, so this is kind of like the question. So in our admin, we can see you've got two options here because we've only got one store view on this site. If you had multiple store views, you would have more options along here. But in this case, we've only got one. And what we've had, it's a question for admin. So how do we want this question to look like in our admin section? And then we have a question for the front of the website. So how do we want our customer to see the question? Right, so what I mean by that is in admin, I could say simply wheels, a question mark. Okay, but in the front end, I may want the customer to see, has it got wheels? That's the question. Right, now with that, actually what I could do is leave that blank, and in which case it would inherit whatever admin was saying, but once I override that, then it basically means that it's going to put that question in the front end. Okay, so that's basically creating an attribute. The front end property side, this is how you want that attribute to behave, or what it's used for. And you can see there's all sorts of options in here. Use it in the quick search, use it in the advanced search, comparable on the front end using layered navigation, which is our filters, search navigation, use it for promo rule codes. Quite often what you want is when you're doing something like this where you're creating a list of answers that you want the customer to see and the specification of the product, you want to make sure that you've got this one here enabled, which is visible on product view page on the front end. And the product view page is this page. So here's a typical product. And if I assign that to be yes, and we assign this attribute to this attribute set, then we will be presented with a new tab here, which is additional information. Okay, so I'm just going to set that to yes for now, and I'm going to save the attribute. Okay, the attribute is now saved. If we scroll right down to the bottom, you'll see that we have wheels, and there's the wheels question as well. And so that attribute is now in the system. Okay, if you want to see what we do with this attribute, then I'll pick that up when we're looking at the manage attribute sets and assigning attributes in the attribute set.